Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this media availability about the updated Invasive Carp Action Plan. I'm Greg Husak with the Minnesota DNR Communications. I'll be moderating this conference. I'll ask our DNR spokespeople to introduce themselves in a moment. And we are also joined by some of the many other agencies and organizations who helped inform this plan. I'll also ask them to introduce themselves in a moment. To please turn on their cameras when they speak, if they could do that. They're here for any questions they would like to speak to or that reporters might have specifically for them. To briefly summarize, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources has released the updated Invasive Carp Action Plan for the next 10 years of prevention and management efforts in Minnesota. The plan includes a prioritized set of recommended actions that build upon the DNR's current intensive invasive carp efforts. Along with a link to the webpage with the action plan itself, there's also a statement from DNR Commissioner Sarah Stroman in the news release that was distributed earlier. If you don't have the news release, it is available on the DNR homepage. And again, this conference is being recorded, and the recording will be available in the online DNR media room for reporters after 3 today. I'll now ask our DNR spokespeople to introduce themselves, and please spell your names for reporters, starting with Katie Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone. Katie Smith, Katiesmith, Director of the Ecological and Water Resources Division at Minnesota DNR.
Thanks, Katie. Next is Heidi Wolf.
Hello, everybody. I'm Heidi Wolf, HEIDIWOLF, and I am the Ecosystem Management and Protection Section Manager here at DNR.
Next is Kelly Pennington.
Good afternoon. I'm Kelly Pennington, KELLYPENNINGTON. I'm the Invasive Species Unit Supervisor in the Division of Ecological and Water Resources here at DNR.
Next is Grace Lopnow.
Hi, everybody. I'm Grace Lopnow, GRACELOPPNOW, and I am the Invasive Fish Coordinator for Minnesota DNR.
Next is Kayla Zankel.
Hello, my name is Kayla Zankel, KAYLAZANKLE, and I'm the Invasive Carp Field Lead under the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife for the Minnesota DNR.
And now let's please do the same for non-DNR participants in the update process. If you would just jump in. I don't know exactly who you are, so we'll just take you as you come. Please go ahead and turn on your camera and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Whitney Clark, WHITNEYCLARK. I'm the Executive Director at Friends of the Mississippi River.
I'm also with Friends of the Mississippi River. My name is Colleen O'Connor Toberman. I'm the Land Use and Planning Director. And it's a long one, COLLEEN. My last name is O'Connor, O''CONNOR, Toberman, TOBERMAN. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Colleen. Any others?
This is John Anfinson. I am the retired superintendent of the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, currently FMR's board chair, and I worked on writing the first 2 versions of the action plan. It's JOHNANFINSON.
Thank you for being with us, John. Anyone else?
Yeah, Mark Holston, HOLSTEN. I'm the Executive Director of MinFish Sport Fishing Foundation.
Welcome. Is that everyone?
I was going to say, this is Mike Colvin. I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey, and my MIKECOLV as in Victor IN. And myself, along with my colleague, Max Post Vanderberg, that's MAX, capital P OST, lowercase VAN, lowercase DER, uppercase BURG, facilitated the structured decision-making process from the USGS. Over.
Thanks for mentioning that. Anyone else?
This is Tim Adams. I'm a That's about it. Tim, TIM, ADAMS.
Thank you, Tim. And we have a list of reporters who RSVP'd to Steve Carroll, so we won't do a rundown of all the reporters now. We just ask that you please identify yourselves before asking your first question. Thanks very much. At any time, anyone can open your microphone and speak, or if you prefer, raise your hand and we will come to you. So let's go to Heidi Wolf, who has a few opening comments, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Greg. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here today. As you know, the DNR has updated the Minnesota Invasive Carp Action Plan for 2024. You can access that plan online. You should have all gotten a link today. The key purpose of the action plan is to slow the spread of invasive carp, minimize their impact, and reduce the likelihood of invasive carp reproducing in Minnesota waters. The DNR updated the action plan in 2024 to incorporate information we've learned in the last decade through responding to invasive silver, bighead, and grass carp in Minnesota, and to include updated information about approaches to invasive carp prevention and management that have changed since the last plan update in 2014. To inform portions of the action plan update, the DNR convened technical experts and stakeholders as part of a structured decision-making planning process to evaluate potential actions to prevent and manage invasive carp in the Mississippi River. The action plan is organized into 5 key elements: monitoring to support response action, prevention and deterrence, response preparation, management and control, communication, outreach, and coordination. The action plan looks forward at the next 10 years, 2024 to 2033. Many of the actions are continuations of work that DNR and partners are already doing to prevent and manage invasive carp in Minnesota. Implementation of plan actions will depend on availability of resources, including funding and partners, and changes to conditions or technologies that could render an action obsolete. The action plan includes a suite of management actions, as no one action is sufficient to prevent and manage invasive carp. The DNR has been taking an integrated approach to slow the spread of invasive carp since the early 2000s, using key strategies including monitoring for all life stages of invasive carp in Minnesota: adults, juveniles, eggs, and larvae; tagging and tracking invasive carp in Minnesota waters to inform management; contracting with commercial fishing operations to target invasive carp for capture and removal; working with partners to develop and test methods to target carp in low-density populations; and assessing watershed boundaries and installing and maintaining deterrents or barriers where appropriate. Also coordinating with researchers to determine key locations and actions for monitoring and management, and conducting outreach to encourage public reporting and awareness of invasive carp, and then participating in state, regional, national, and binational coordination efforts. Also in July of 2023, the DNR received an appropriation for $1.7 million for invasive carp prevention and management. Planned activities with these funds include funding a study on modifying dam operations to prevent upstream movement, further exploring a deterrent for Lock and Dam 5, adding additional staff to increase tagging and targeting commercial fishing, purchasing field equipment, and investigating methods for selective fish passage that could pass native fish while removing invasive carp. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Let's go ahead with reporter questions. Feel free to just open your mic and ask your questions. Please identify yourselves first. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, this is Greg Stanley at the Star Tribune. Could you guys talk more about what you plan to do at Lock and Dam 5? I was under the impression that the feasibility portion of that study was already done by the U, and just wanted to hear your thoughts on what more studies need to be done and what this plan specifically is proposing we do for that deterrent.
I can take that one or start with it, and Grace, others, I welcome you to jump in. Right now, the feasibility study that was done, I believe, is at a 10% total. And so what happens with feasibility studies is different percentages give you more information about the project. While that study or piece of work did allow us to learn some things about what a lock and dam deterrent might be like at LD5. It didn't give us as much information as we might like. Also, that lock and dam is actually owned and operated by U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we have been working with them to learn more about the environmental review and other processes and permits that would have to be undertaken for us to be able to go further down the road to elaborate and understand better how a deterrent might be installed there, costs, owning and operating, and who would maintain that into the future.
Heidi, this is Dennis Anderson, also at the Star Tribune. Let me follow up on that. You were given the DNR was given the 1.7 million last year, and you just spoke to I think, scope and evaluate a deterrent at 5. How much money did you spend in that effort, and what did you accomplish?
Yeah, right now what we've been working on, Dennis, is a conversation with U.S. Army Corps to better determine what they require. Until we know that, we don't want to get very far down the road. We do have an RFP, a request for proposals, drafted right now that an engineering firm or someone else could reply to. But again, we're looking for final information from U.S. Army Corps about what they need for the next step. Because Minnesota DNR and the state of Minnesota doesn't own or operate LD5, we don't have the ability to just install a deterrent there. We would have to do that in partnership and with permits for LD5. And so we're just but we've been in conversations with U.S. Army Corps to better understand what they need for that specific project.
Right, but I mean, you've had the money since July 1st, and when did the conversations start, and were there multiple conversations, or how far down the line are you on that?
Yes, there has been multiple conversations, including with our commissioner's office, directly with U.S. Army Corps, better detailing what exactly is needed there. And at the same time, simultaneously, we have been creating that request for proposal, so it's ready as soon as we have that final information. I think Grace can probably speak to, or Kayla, some of the other things that we've done with that $1.7 million appropriation. One of you wants to jump in?
Let me just ask you. So has the Army Corps told you what they need in terms of permits and so forth? Do you have an answer on that, or when do you expect an answer?
We have some clarity around potential permits that are needed regarding there would be a realty permit that we'd need to use the property. There'd also be several levels of environmental review, which may be the more challenging part. And I don't know that we have exact information in terms of what percent design they're looking for. We've definitely had conversations with them and are trying to help them better understand the scope of the project and what that might look like, to better ask what exactly they need for both the realty permit and the different types of environmental review that would have to be accomplished before that project starts.
This is Brian Mosey with Outdoor News. I was just wondering, one of the points that you had in the plan is advocating for a deterrent at Lock and Dam 19. Obviously, that's not Minnesota, but advocating for it. I guess, can you explain more about how you're advocating? I mean, is it helping them with understanding the resources behind it? Is it actually going and providing funds to help build that deterrent? I guess, what does advocating mean in that sense?
Yeah, the state of Minnesota, Grace Lopnow is our invasive fish coordinator and is part of national and binational efforts to reduce the impacts of invasive carp in the United States. And so we actually have a voice on many of those groups, panels, coordinating groups. And so in those venues, we would provide both our opinion and support for a permanent installation of a barrier at Lock and Dam 19, and also our technical expertise. And so we would definitely be prepared to provide both those things at this time. You may note, as you look further into the plan, that that Lock and Dam 19 permanent barrier was supported in all levels of the plan. It was highly popular by technical experts as a significant way to impact what happens in Minnesota.
There's a question in the chat from Tasha Radel with MNN. Are there any major changes in your mind to the updated action plan compared to the original plan drafted 10 years ago?
I can jump in on this one and invite others to follow. Yeah, there are significant things. Some of the things that have changed since 10 years ago, this last about 2 years is the first time we've seen any actual deterrents installed in the United States. And so there's 2 in place right now, one owned and operated by U.S. Army Corps, one by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so that gave us a lot more information about actual in situ barrier instead of a barrier that, you know, was a concept. And so that's been very interesting to include that. We've also gained a lot in terms of technology and methodology on invasive carp capture. We've gained the ability to tag and track invasive carp in the water, which has changed the way that we capture and remove carp. So there's quite a bit that is different from the 2014 update, just in terms of the tools that we have and the research and knowledge that we have. And some of those things are reflected there. Kelly or Grace, I invite you to also answer this question.
Yeah, I'll jump in as well. Thanks, Heidi. I'd say also we have somewhat shifted a focus from early detection and monitoring that the early plan was mostly focused on to response and monitoring and other actions that support response to invasive carp in the state. There's much more of an emphasis on contracted commercial fishing, tagging and tracking, like Heidi mentioned, to support that effort. As well as these new technologies that have come online. So I think we've shifted kind of the monitoring components to be more focused on response.
And you'll note too that some of the $1.7 million appropriation is being heavily spent on that tagging and tracking the invasive carp removal, which also was the highest rated methodology for the action plan that we need to overfish as heavily as we can to remove invasive carp. And so we are increasing that by magnitudes based on both that feedback and the availability of that $1.7 million appropriation. We've also been working on that appropriation with Dr. Peter Sorensen on a spillway study, Lock and Dam gateway study, because one of the issues we have right now is when there is flooding and gates have to be opened, that's how invasive carp are getting upriver. If we could modify that gate operation so that they can't get upriver, that'd be excellent. And there is an expert that we're hoping to contract and work with through the university and Peter. We've also purchased some equipment that we're very excited about that will further allow us to remove invasive carp from the water, and are interested in looking at some potential native fish passage as well.
I'm watching the chat and hands up, and I'll just mention Dr. Sorensen is on the call and has joined us, so welcome, Peter. Per Peterson has a hand up and may have been wanting to speak to one of the earlier questions. I want to just ask about that, and then Brian Mosey may have a follow-up and also some questions in the chat we'll get to. Per Peterson, if your mic is open, we're not hearing you. Unfortunately, we're not able to hear you right now. If you have a comment you'd like to perhaps enter into the chat, type into the chat, we would be able to see it that way. I'll go back to Brian Mosey, as you might have a follow-up question here, Brian, and then look at the other things.
Yeah, thank you. One of my questions, I actually have 2 right now. One of them is on the trackers and tagging. When it comes to, I know part of this action plan was increased tagging and tracking efforts. What does that cost look like? I mean, in a sense of if you're going to increase more and try to add more trackers into these carp, what does it look like in the sense of, is the hope to get 50, and how much does that cost? Is it, 100? How much does that cost? And then my other question is, a part of that action plan as well was talking about potential incentives for harvest for commercial fishermen, and kind of a quote unquote bounty, I guess you could say. Is that just for commercial fishermen, or would that be for public citizens as well that are going to be fishing possibly on the Mississippi River and such?
Grace, do you want to speak, or Kayla, to the costs and availability of tagging and tracking?
Sure, I can jump in, and Kayla, feel free to join as well. Yeah, costs. So essentially, the costs involved in tagging and tracking are for staffing, as well as the cost for the tags that are put into the fish. Kayla, how much does a tag cost? Off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
I believe the tags that we are going with right now are about $400.
Okay, and those tags last
and
for
those
multiple
last for
years.
10 years.
Yep, 10 years. And then also there's costs associated with the receivers that detect the tags in the water. We currently have a receiver array, as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service maintains a receiver array. There is a component in the plan to expand the receiver array as well, to provide additional coverage in the pools where we're focusing on contracted commercial fishing. I'm sorry, could you repeat the other part of your
The question of a bounty on invasive carp. And
Oh,
so I
yeah.
will say that right now, it's a little bit complicated in that it's illegal to possess invasive carp without a permit. If folks capture one, we do ask that they report it, and then they can keep the fish. We just have some questions to ask about it and might want some reproductive parts or other parts of it. So if you do catch one, please report it. We want that information, and then you can possess it, eat it, do whatever you need to do with it. However, if commercial fishermen were to catch these, or fisher people, they can report that also to DNR. We have a great relationship with those folks, and that is what's happened in the past. If they do happen to catch these accidentally, they essentially keep them in pens in the water for us. We go in and take them out, examine them, do all the things with them. Regarding a bounty program, luckily, we don't have a high enough population right now to think about that, and it's definitely something we've heard other states doing. I don't know if it's an item that we've really discussed very much at this point. If Grace or Kayla, if you have any other input on that, please add.
I think there's two possibilities there. There's a bounty program that would be kind of a per fish bounty, and then there's subsidies on catches of invasive carp for commercial fishers. And we have in the plan to look into both of those and see what if either would be appropriate, and what would need to occur if either of those were to be implemented.
We're following the comments in the chat and hands up, and we will get to those. As Per Peterson had a hand up earlier, entered this question in the chat. Can you speak to how these efforts will affect lakes in southwest Minnesota, such as Lake Sheddock and Lake Sarah, big walleye lakes, but more and more they are being overrun by carp? Thanks.
So in this case, Per, you're actually speaking to common carp. And we are talking about invasive carp, which are slightly different. They are both invasive, so it gets very confusing. This plan does not deal with those common carp for the state. It really is focused on the invasive carp. We don't have any invasive carp in any inland water bodies like lakes in the state of Minnesota right now.
And it would be a good time to touch on Ari Bergeron's question, Ari from WCCO, saying what kinds of problems do invasive carp present? Very good fundamental question.
Yeah, I can jump into that. Invasive carp are very tenacious fish. They move. They can move long distances in a short amount of time, and so we've seen invasive carp moving into Minnesota from downstream at higher densities, which we are in an area considered to be low density. But at higher densities, invasive carp can cause problems with native fish, where they are competing with native fish for food bighead and silver carp filter feed plankton from the water, which serves as the base of the food chain. And that can cause some problems for sport fish further up the food chain in those locations where there's high densities of invasive carp. Silver carp are also capable of jumping out of the water up to 10 feet. So there are concerns about public safety with silver carp jumping from the water.
Come back to Colleen's good comment and thought in the chat in a moment. In order, we've got Rob from Outdoor News, Dennis, Dan Gunderson, and Greg Stanley. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, looking at your action items 2.3, scope feasibility and design for installing deterrents at lock and dams 5 and 4, is secondarily at lock and dams 2 and 8. Am I reading that correctly, that this plan could, if it were implemented, ultimately result in some deterrents built at as many as 4 lock and dams on the river?
In this scenario, if we were to build at 5 and 4, that would be we'd do that. If that didn't work out or was found it wasn't feasible or wasn't effective, then 2 and 8 would be the second place that we'd begin looking. So not 4 deterrents, but I believe 2 deterrents. Grace and Kelly, make sure that I'm correct in that belief.
This is Kelly. I think that's an accurate characterization, Heidi, and also just noting that the plan actions right now are really to explore and further scope the feasibility and extend the designs for those locations, not specifically for installation on this time horizon.
Dennis is next. Go ahead.
This is Dennis Anderson again. My question is for, I think it's Mike Colvin. Is he with the USGS originally? Do I have that correct?
Yeah.
I think that it was more than 20 years. I looked for it this morning, but I couldn't find it exactly. But I think it was more than 20 years ago that a lock and dam, a deterrent at lock and dam 19 was recommended, advised, supported. It was a great idea and so forth. And many times in the intervening years, it's been recommended as well, and it hasn't happened. Can you give us some background on the recommendation or what this report from the DNR recommends on their part, advocacy for a deterrent there, the realistic chance that could happen, what permits are required, and so forth?
That's, at least from my perspective, that's outside the scope of what I was involved with in terms of this process. So myself and Max Post Vanderberg were the facilitators of the structured decision-making process. So we worked with the group to step through an objective and repeatable process to evaluate some of these alternatives. And so I'll defer to Heidi, Grace, or Kelly, or possibly some of my other USGS colleagues to answer that question. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So currently at LD19, there is a temporary barrier, and the recommendation by the technical team was that that barrier become permanent or a permanent barrier be enacted there. This is also an opportunity to prevent potentially black carp and snakehead since they are below lock and dam 19, which we would be really excited about preventing in the state of Minnesota. Currently, it's a underwater acoustic deterrent, so a different type of deterrent than we're going to see at Barkley in Arkansas. And USGS does maintain that deterrent. I don't know if anyone's on, sorry, Kentucky. It's in Barkley, Kentucky. And I don't know if anyone is on from USGS who could speak more to that deterrent, or Grace, if you wanted to add in more about that.
Well, in your structured decision-making process, you must have brought up the topic of permitting at 19 as well, and what would be required. And I'm not sure that's correctly identified as temporary. It's really an experimental deterrent at 19 right now, isn't it?
Well, so folks from the USGS who maintain that were a part of these conversations. It's temporary in that it is experimental in nature. It's not a permanent installation, and USGS owns and operates that lock and dam. So I can't speak to what environmental review they might have gone through their own process. But no, we didn't delve into that in the structured decision making that I'm aware of, but I welcome others to speak up.
I see Mary Beth has her camera on. Mary Beth, would you care to speak to this? You've been heavily involved in this project.
Yeah, Mary Beth Bray. I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and we lead this study at Lock 19 of the underwater acoustic deterrent system. That is a study, and so that is something where we've been able to use for some of the environmental reviews, a categorical exclusion of NEPA for research purposes, and that's why we're able to do that work there. And so it did go through a review. It went through injurious species and endangered species reviews by the Fish and Wildlife Service. It has a Iowa and Illinois states both reviewed the plans for the study. We have collection permits, and then we have our Corps of Engineers permits, such as the realtor or real estate permit, amongst a couple others. But the difference there is that that is a study. It was slated to be temporary as it stands now, and we're able to extend that for research for a finite period of time. If that were to become permanent, there's additional steps that would need to be taken and additional reviews that would need to happen for that to stay at that location.
Thank you.
Dan Gunderson is next.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first is about removal of invasive carp, and I'm wondering if you can speak to, new technology and what advancements we might see over the next 10 years and how that might affect efforts to remove invasive carp.
I can jump in, and I welcome Kayla to jump in as well, or even Tim if he'd like to. So we've been working together with USGS, Fish and Wildlife Service, Wisconsin DNR, National Park Service, and Wild Rivers Conservancy on testing some new methods for capture of invasive carp. These include some new herding techniques using sound and electricity to herd invasive carp, as well as new netting techniques. USGS has developed some jumping nets that are surface floating nets that essentially are there to entangle jumping invasive carp and remove them from the system. Tim has also been working on developing some jumping nets for his equipment as well. And so that's one direction we've been looking. We're also looking into attractants and whether we can kind of concentrate invasive carp for capture and removal. And we continue to use tagging and tracking, eDNA, and other surveillance techniques to try to better locate sites for capturing invasive carp. There may also be some modeling available that we could use to try to predict locations where invasive carp will be located at certain times of the year to enhance our capture abilities. So that is something we are also currently looking into, and all these things are also in the action plan. Kayla, if you have anything to add, please feel free.
Yeah, the only other thing that I have to add is that we are getting a new electrofishing boat with some leftover federal money that we received, and we're really hoping that will kind of give us an edge moving forward, since our previous one was over 20 years old that we continually borrowed. So we're really looking forward to some new technology and being able to really kind of crack down on some of the settings that we can use.
And then a second question about long-term control and research. Could you speak to what might be some of the most promising things we could look forward to happening in the next 10 years in terms of research for long-term control?
For long-term control, I think there's a couple different directions that people are looking. Right now, an integrated approach is our best available option. So we want to keep moving forward with multiple approaches. But I do think that there is a particular interest right now among invasive carp managers in genetic biocontrol and the potential that that option may hold. Right now, it's in a very preliminary stage, and there are many questions to be answered on that about what that looks like and how that could be implemented. But I do think long term, that's something that there's a lot of interest around because it could be selective and potentially, target a wider population of invasive carp simultaneously. Other options, I think, also include continuing to develop removal techniques, as well as continuing to develop techniques in deterrence and possibly interrupting reproduction or targeting reproduction in some sort of way to prevent proliferation of invasive carp.
Greg Stanley is next. Greg.
Yeah, I have two quick questions too. The first is Grace and Kayla, the plan it mentions kind of upping the number of days you're actually out there actively on the water targeted fishing. And I was wondering, do you have a cost estimate for that, or do you even need anything from the legislature to do that, or can you do that starting next spring on your own?
So we have some funding in place from the appropriation to increase contracted commercial fishing of invasive carp. We have a target of 100 days of contracted commercial fishing using that appropriation. But for it to continue long term, we would need additional funds. This is a temporary appropriation that will be good through fiscal year 2025. And so continued funding would be needed to maintain that level. And the way we are thinking of implementing this is to have multiple contracted commercial fishing crews available to go out at one time to really maximize harvest in those critical times when invasive carp tend to congregate in spring and fall.
And then my other question is at the end of this plan, it talks about trying to find some use for these things, whether it's food or whatever it might be. And Tim, I was hoping to hear from you. Is there a market when you guys catch these? Can you sell them anywhere in the country, or what do you think we might be able to find to do with all this fish?
Oh, sure, this is Tim. Down south.
Tim, I'm afraid we've lost your audio. I don't know if you can make any adjustments. Okay, we can hear you a little better now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, if you could please start over. Thank you.
Sure. Down south, like Illinois and Kentucky and all that, there's markets down there that process a lot of fish. But up here, it's there's not enough fish. Commercial fishermen for us, there's not enough silver or silver big-head carp to catch enough to sell to make any money. But as time goes on, that'll probably happen. Keep expanding the markets upriver, I guess, that the fish come.
Tim, I'm sorry, you've been cutting in and out a little bit. We're catching a little bit of your answer. If you might like to write a brief summary into the chat,
Sure.
That might be helpful. Thank you very much.
Greg, I can try to jump in here a little bit too,
please.
since I've worked with Tim enough. Basically, what it comes down to is we just simply do not have enough fish up here to sustain a market. Therefore, if you can't sustain having a processing plant, it's not going to be a long-term solution. Down in Kentucky and Illinois, where there is a high density population, there is a slight market down there for them. However, even if it comes to the point of us being able to catch these things and ship them down there, the cost makes it pretty much ineffective. Not only if you're using these for human consumption, these fish need to be, properly maintained for human consumption, all the way down and shipping them all the way down to Illinois. With the cost of shipping, it just makes it very infeasible with the way that the market currently sits with commercial fishing.
And Tim just entered in the chat that Kayla's saying exactly what he wanted to say. So thanks very much for that, Tim and Kayla. Brian Mosey is next.
Yeah, thank you. One other quick question for me was, I know the conversation about managing these carp has been going on for years. I know it was a topic that was brought up in the roundtable last year. It's been a bill that was brought up in last year's legislative session, and then also beyond that year as well. I guess my question is there any sense of this being too late or right on time in the sense of managing these carp and getting ahead of this so that that it doesn't spread any more upstream?
I think here that we are very hopeful that we have the tools and ability to definitely impact and manage, prevent the spread of invasive carp further north. We're highly concerned, as all others are. It's unfortunate that we've had such significant flooding events the last few years. That has really made it difficult to keep the population south of us. We will be, again, taking every action that we can to reduce populations and keep the numbers as low as possible in the state of Minnesota while exploring other options. And as Grace mentioned, it's an integrated pest management system. We are going to have to use a lot of tools, and we're going to have partners to keep working on this issue. It's also an area where some of the technology is new and hasn't been tried. Those deterrents are very new. We're learning more about them. It's extremely exciting that they've been installed and are being reviewed by USGS and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we're really grateful to have partners who are willing to come and work with us and do things like large captures and events where we look at technologies out in the field to see how effective they could be. We really could not do this without partners, but it's going to continue to be a process. While we all wish there was a silver bullet, that's not the case here. And so we'll keep working on the issue very much so. Thank you.
I think Dennis is next, but I just want to check and see if Greg Stanley had another follow-up or just still had his hand up.
No, sorry, that's a mistake.
Okay, no problem. No problem. Thank you, Greg. Dennis, go ahead.
Thank you. Last year in the legislature, there was a bill to basically fund a deterrent at Lock Dam 5. And the DNR, go back to your use of the word advocated against that bill. And this year in session, there will be another bill. And I guess this question is probably best directed to Katie, initially anyway. And in your talks with the commissioner on this plan, do you know whether the DNR is going to oppose that similar bill again this session?
Katie, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Dennis, I think we'd have to review any specifics for any, specific proposals that were brought forward to ensure that they align with our action plan, but we need to look at the language to see if we could support that or if we had any concerns that we'd want to share.
But just to follow up on that, the governor's bonded budget was released yesterday or the day before, and there's no money in it for a deterrent at 5 or really anywhere. And in helping to form the DNR's funding request for the governor's bonding bill, did this come up? Was it discussed? Maybe we should try to get some bonding money for it?
The DNR is not seeking any new funding this session for any of the action plan measures. Any funding requests would be sought in the next biennial budget session.
Okay.
Rob with Outdoor News is next.
Yeah, kind of a softball for you here. Looking at Appendix C, this graphic, I was under the impression that most of the Asian carp we were catching were either silver or with a few big heads. Looking at this graphic, it looks like as many as from 50 to 75 were grass carp. Were those Mississippi River fish, or were those caught elsewhere? Or and if so, when were they caught? Were most of these from this past fall when we had the big haul?
Yeah, these were Mississippi River grass carp. And yes, many of these were from that large haul in late November, early December. Kayla, if you have anything else to say to the grass carp we've captured, please feel free to join in. But yeah, they're from the Mississippi River.
Yeah, actually only one of those this year was from the Iowa Great Lakes, Coppe commercial fishermen down there. All the rest of those fish have been from the Mississippi River drainage this year.
That's kind of new, isn't it? I mean, clearly you look at the previous couple of years, there were hardly any grass carp. I don't know what that means. It's just, like I say, I was kind of under the impression this was a big head and silver carp phenomenon. Is that worrisome where all of a sudden grass carp are finding their way up too?
In my opinion, I don't think it's really too worrisome. We saw something very similar in the March of 2020 capture when we down in pool 8, when we had 50 some captured down there. We did see a larger percentage of grass carp in that haul as well. And what just kind of an anecdotal evidence here, but what we've noticed is that these grass carp tend to congregate in these winter sites with the big head and the silver carp. So we're just, when we have an opportunity to go out and target these larger schools in colder water, we tend to see more of them.
I'll also add too that we've been in contact with the Lake Erie grass carp strike team that is targeting grass carp in the Sandusky River in Ohio. And we are collaborating with them to adopt some of their methods that they have available for sampling for grass carp as well.
I'd mentioned earlier I would acknowledge Colleen O'Connor-Tilberman's message in the chat from Friends of the Mississippi River, noting that the DNR will be presenting the action plan to the public at a series of community meetings hosted by Friends of the Mississippi River and the Lake Pepin Legacy Alliance. She lists the dates of those and locations and has a link for more information on that. Now, we had a number of reporters and others that joined our call here as it was in process. So I just want to take a moment to see if anyone who has joined since we started or just recently jumped in has a question or anything they would like to add. If not, thank you so much for this very robust conversation today. And again, more details, the plan itself, and more information is on the DNR website at mndnr.gov/invasive carp, all one word, mndnr.gov/invasive carp. Thank you very much.